All right, introduction to Esther. So it's pretty fast because it's just the introduction. We might finish early, which is always nice. Okay, let me situate in time a little bit. So we're moving forward. We left King Solomon, which is around 10th century BC. Now we're moving into the first exile. Oh, first or second? Exile to Babylon. There's just one, right? Because the others were exiled by Syria, the northern kingdom.
The Babylonian exile and the
Yeah.
That's it. Okay, that's the second exile is a Roman.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So what about the exile of the northern kingdom? Is that counted as first exile?
same
That's Babylonian, right?
It's Babylonian also, but it's a little bit earlier than the
Babylonian exile was first, Roman exile was second. Everything.
Right.
Place.
But what about the exile of the north? So Judah was
Everything's
exiled in,
there.
yeah, so the northern were exiled before by Assyria.
Yeah.
You guys remember?
Yeah.
Is that considered, did that become Babylon? Who knows the details of this?
I think it's grouped in.
I think it's weekend.
Thank God, merci. This is my mom. No. She has, thankfully, we have the notes. Okay, good. All right, so this is around 6th century BC. We are in the time a little bit after the Babylonian exile. So we're talking about your background. We have in Iraq, no,
Barney,
kind of where are
I
you?
mean, it was like Iran. first.
Yeah, Iran. Okay,
Same
so
way.
good, same region,
Yeah.
right? So you're the ancestor of these people here that we're going to talk about. Not the ancestor, descendant. Yes, no, not the ancestor. So we're talking about your people. So first exile, right, was in Babylon, and we have one particular biblical figure who was way before Esther, and during the right at the moment of the exile was Daniel, right? And there are a lot of parallels actually between the book of Daniel and the book of Esther because it's a very similar situation. You have a young person exiled in the kingdom of Babylon, and there's the question of integration. Do I assimilate? Do I not assimilate? Do I continue to worship the God of Israel or not? And we'll see that the two have very different approaches. There are a number of parallels, right? You have I don't know why, I'm sure somebody has written about those, right? But we're going to talk about those parallels as we go into the book of Esther, but they should be read together. So Esther comes later, right? After Babylon, we know that the Persians invaded the Babylonian Empire, and we're here under one of those Persian kings, right? Who's known under two names, Xerxes I, I'll write it on the board, his official name. Or Ahasuerus. In the Hebrew. Ahasuerus. Okay. Learn that big word. We'll be using it for that king. Okay. So that's the Persian king now that's in control. And Esther then is the descendant, right, of these Jews that were exiled. This is several generations, maybe 3 or 4 generations after Daniel. You have Esther, right? Okay, so these are typically assimilated Jews, right? They're the whole, what Daniel was doing, trying to maintain his identity. To a certain degree, you have the same thing with Esther, right? Remember Daniel, what happened when they tried to change his name? What was the name, by the way, that they gave him? Anybody remember? Me neither. Look at somebody, you have a Bible, check Daniel 1. Tell me what happened to the names. I don't think you have Daniel. Do you over there? Yeah, you do? In the, no way, okay. So you have an issue of the names, just like in Esther. It's interesting. Which, look it up while I'll continue. I'll ask you again. Okay, so they're mostly assimilated Jews. They have Persian names. Esther has a Persian name, right? Ishtar. That's her actual, she's named after the goddess Ishtar. So definitely, but she also has a Hebrew name. We see that in the text, right? Which she keeps a secret. Daniel, it's a little different. You have the same issue with the name. Does anybody see it now?
Yeah.
What?
Belteshazzar.
Belshazzar. Yes, so he's given a Babylonian name, but he keeps his Hebrew name. Or no, actually, him and his friends are given Babylonian names, but they kind of tweak them, right? To make them, they make them more Hebraic. So they're kind of resisting the assimilation by tweaking the names they're given, which end up being a kind of ends up destroying the intent of the Babylonian name, which was to assimilate. So there's also a kind of struggle with to keep their name or to keep their identity. The name is the identity, right? So whenever you talk about the name, you're talking about the identity. So they resist the assimilation. She also, to a certain degree, resists by having period a Hebrew name and by keeping it secret, right? So assimilated, but also somewhat anchored still in the Jewish worldview and so forth. So the setting of this story, it fits our time right now. It's early spring, right? Same time as now. This is normally the time when Purim is celebrated, which we'll talk about. So it's interesting because the writer of this book is very familiar with Babylonian literature because there is actually a play on the names. So Esther, so I'll write it down. You have two famous divinities in Babylon. You have Marduk and you have Ishtar. Okay. So Marduk is very important for this time of the year because this time of the year celebrates the moment where Marduk, the male deity of Babylon, right? He's male and she's female. He defeats the serpent goddess Tiamat, right? Who is the goddess of chaos, of the ocean, of water. So he defeats her and establishes order, cosmic order, the city of Babylon. So he represents the civilizing forces against the forces of chaos. And this is Marduk, the god who becomes the principal deity of Babylon, right? Ishtar, of course, is more ancient. She dates back from Inanna, right? She's just the evolution of Inanna. So it's a very similar goddess, goddess of love, but also goddess of war, the goddess who enthrones the king, right? Very similar characteristics that we already have met in Inanna, right? So in our story, we have two names that echo these two deities. I mentioned Esther. Who's the one who echoes Marduk? Mordechai, right? So it's so interesting, right? So the author is playing on this, right? He's kind of having fun with this. So this is kind of saying, okay, this is our this is our rendition, right, of the story. We're going to use the same concepts and we're going to tell a very different story, right? So this is the Hebrew version, right, of these myths. So we're going to see, right, Mordechai in many ways is going to rise to a status of almost king, right? He ends up making the law, making the decrees. He is the one, basically the executive power. By the end of the book, he has reached the state of executive power, and Esther has legislative power. She's writing the decrees, and Mordechai is executing them. The king kind of disappears in the background, right? Achashverosh. So you have kind of this notion here of Marduk, Mordechai, fighting over the forces of chaos and creating again order in Babylon, right? So this is the Hebrew version. It's like we have our version of this is our Marduk, right? Yes. Tell me more.
Because he rises up to become
Ah, yes.
advisor to the Pharaoh. He's a powerful person.
Yes, yes.
He defeats the people who want to destroy him through his ability. But in his story, there's God, and he was.
Yeah, very good. Yes, absolutely. Right. In the story of Joseph, there's although with Joseph, God is kind of far away, right? Not as, but God definitely is around. Yeah. Here,
In the story,
yeah,
but it's
not here. Yeah, there, except the Hellenistic version that Rivera has. Right. Very good. Excellent. So, okay, so we have this, right? And then we have, so that's the setting, the springtime, basically the idea is the overcoming of the forces of chaos, but this time in Jewish history, not in Babylonian history, right? So this is how the forces of chaos were overcome or can be overcome. And in a way, I read it very existentially, right? I like to read these texts as having lessons for us as individuals. This is how we can overcome, right? We receive here wisdom in these texts as to how we can overcome the forces of chaos in our own lives, right? And take back control. Esther is a very masculine book, right? Queen Esther is going to start out goddess of love and finish goddess of war, right? She's going to become more and more active This is why, in a way, both men and women can learn from Esther, right? She's starting very passively, but she becomes a much more and more proactive and agency, right? A character who is a protagonist for real and not a supporting character. And she really ends up with center stage, right? So we see kind of this. So we're going to learn, right? We're going to learn from Queen Esther. The goal of the book is how do we overcome the forces of chaos and reestablish the sovereignty of order in our personal kingdoms or in the political arena or wherever, right? But this is taking place, of course, in Jewish history. Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit more about Esther before I get into Mother's House and so forth. So it's an interesting book. I think it's never been read like that. I haven't seen much. I read this book as the first kind of feminist book of the Bible, right? Especially with the Queen Vashti in the beginning. Most of the time, this book is read more as a political book with political intrigues, right? The focus is on Mordechai and, you know, the saving of the Jewish people. But I kind of like to read this book from, and, you know, the feminine perspective. What can I learn from this woman? What can I learn, right? How is this book in a way a critique of patriarchy? In many ways it is, right? We see Vashti, we see two characters that are critiquing patriarchy in this book. We have the first queen of Achashverosh, Vashti, and then we have Esther. And they both are offering a critique of patriarchy, but they move very differently, right? Vashti, we're going to see, is confrontational. She's direct and not very successful. And then we see Esther, much more political, much more manipulative, which is interesting, right? These are two feminine approaches to subverting the structures of patriarchy. So I really think this book is one of the really feminist books in the Hebrew Bible. There's a lot here to be read if you're interested in feminism and the critique of patriarchy and how does one navigate patriarchy, right? Can one really confront patriarchy directly, aggressively, or must one learn to navigate it? I think that's the two that's the two things I'm seeing there, right? Maybe you can jot this down, right? So when faced in general, right? When faced with oppression, what's more useful? Direct confrontation, aggressive confrontation, or navigation, right? Working with the structure rather than trying to dismantle the structure. I think there's a lot to be learned here in terms of feminist philosophy, which tends to be directly confrontational, right? And is it working? That's the question I would ask, right? And Esther being much more willing to work with the system, to work with patriarchy in order to achieve liberation. I'm reminded here of two approaches to civil rights that we had in the United States. We had Malcolm X and we had Martin Luther King. Malcolm X, of course, toned down his rhetoric after a while, but Malcolm X was directly confrontational, right? Very, very aggressive voice against oppression. And Martin Luther King, on the contrary, was much more willing to work with the status quo, to work with the structures that were in place. He was lobbying the president. He was, you know, he wasn't just doing nonviolent, of course, he was doing, of course, all these nonviolent actions, but he was also lobbying on the level of the government. He had communication with the president and so forth. So this is a good story, right? If you want to dismantle, if you want to resist rather oppression, how do you proceed? Do you directly confront aggressively, or do you work with the system? Esther, in a way, is closer to Martin Luther King than to Malcolm X, right? We know what happened to Malcolm X in the end. I really am from the firm belief that when it comes to evil, direct confrontation is never going to work, right? You cannot overcome evil aggressively. I think I've seen this, right? The soft approach is much more effective. In Taoist philosophy, they say, even the Bible says that, they say that water can overcome stone, right? We know this, right? Water can eventually, gently, softly, persistently, right? Dig a big hole in a stone. And in the Hebrew Bible, we have the proverb, soft word overcomes a bone. It's like, so interesting, right? This is just, if you want to, you can learn on the level of, you know, gender relations, but you can also learn here from this book on the level of political resistance. What is the best approach to or confronting oppression. Okay. So yes, all right, let's get into Mother's House. Let's see how this book, of course, quite obviously belongs to Mother's House literature. Okay, so first of all, male versus female, right? Male versus female. Obviously, right, Esther is the central character. Sadly, in the end of the book, Mordechai kind of takes over, right? She kind of falls also in the shadows with the king Ahashverosh, and Mordechai is seen as the ultimate victor here. So in a way, the book not completely overturns patriarchy, although you have strong voices of resistance. But definitely for the most of the book, Esther is the main character. Again, I mentioned she's affiliated. Certainly the author is connecting her to Ishtar, goddess of love and of war. And Esther has these two characters in her, right? She's very feminine, very loving, and she's well versed in the arts of love. She seduces the king, but at the same time, in the end, she's the one who starts a war, or doesn't start a war, but fights it, right? If you know the story, right? So and it's interesting because we have to ask ourselves, right? We've been looking in this class at couples, right? Power couples who in a way constitute a playing out of the sacred marriage, right? Trope that we saw with Inanna and Dumuzi. And I guess I would ask you, who do you think is the power couple here in the story? The sacred marriage is taking place between who and who? It's hard. There's several male characters. There's one female. Who's her partner? In the story, if you read it. Yeah,
I mean, her husband is obviously Ahashverosh,
right.
so like
Yes,
that would make sense as the power couple.
I'm gonna look at it like that, right? But some people have argued true power couple is her and Mordechai, right?
Because he, our husband, the king, he's very passive. He doesn't make any decisions really without being pushed by somebody else. And he doesn't speak for himself ever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he's kind of a puppet. Everyone's pulling
yeah,
his strings.
yeah, what the difference between Vashti has no advisor, she has no other forces behind her.
Mm.
And
Yes.
Esther has Mordecai, who's
That's
a
true.
powerful force.
Yeah, very good, very good. So yeah, some people have argued the real power couple is Mordechai and Esther, and in as much as they unite forces, the world is redeemed, right? So that's one way to see it. Me, I'm gonna go in your direction. We seem to be well aligned in general. I'm going to go in the direction here of Michelle. I'm gonna look at the king and Esther as the power couple, right? Although Mordechai does play a strong role in the story. I think you can make the case for both. I'm gonna stick with Ahashverosh. I'm gonna give him a chance. Poor man. So okay. So let's see. Yes, and we have the same notion, right, of the sacred marriage and that's why I like to work with Ahashverosh, because it is in as much as he begins to listen to Esther, right, that he becomes he moves from being a very arbitrary, chaotic king to being a king who makes, wise decisions. So he's in a way shifting. His authority is inaugurated through his contact with Esther. That connects it for me very nicely to Inanna and Dumuzi, right? When Dumuzi enters into contact with Inanna, that's when he rules, right? So the king truly begins to rule when he begins to see Esther as his equal. As long as she's not his equal, as long as she's a mere concubine, right, or a pretty face, he rules very chaotically. There's no true authority in this man, right? But the moment he begins to open up to her and to treat her like an equal is when he begins to make powerful and wise decisions, right? So I'm going to stick with Ahashverosh. I'm going to give him a chance. And of course, as the couple becomes entwined, as they become partners, this is when the world is redeemed, right? We have the same notion of the rebirth of the world that we have in the sacred marriage context, right? When the two get married, boom, you have springtime, right? Same thing here. Yes.
There's a Hebrew name, tree.
Yes, it's a little bush, myrtle. It's the myrtle bush, right? So yes. Why do you make this connection? Of the what?
The tree and
Yes. Oh, thank you. This is nice. Okay. Yes. So Inanna has a tree, Esther has a tree. I hadn't seen that. Thank you. That's interesting. Absolutely. It's not really a tree, it's a bush, right? But it works. She's also connected to like a kind of a life-giving. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so yes, so we do have, in my view, a version of the sacred marriage between Esther and Ahasuerus. You have the way that the king becomes truly a king when he opens up to her, and then you have the renewal of the world, right? The saving of the Jewish people, which occurs, right? In other words, the overcoming of the forces of chaos, of Tiamat. Maybe Haman represents Tiamat here, right? That would be, let's put him up there, right? So Tiamat would be represented here by Haman, right? Haman, right? That's him. Wait,
Yeah.
am I spelling it right? That's it. Is there not two A's? No, okay.
I think that's right.
Okay, right, so we have same story, but this time applied to Jewish history. We have Mordechai overcoming Tiamat, right, Haman, and then we have the redeeming of the world, right? Okay, so let's go into a vertical horizontal. And this is the part I didn't have in my notes, so let me take a quick look here. Yes. Okay, so definitely in Esther, you don't have even the name of God, which is why many people were debating, should we keep this book, right? This book, no God, why should we read this, right? Why is this even in the canon? But, okay, but we do have veiled allusions to God. And this is where it becomes very, very interesting. And we'll talk about this, but I'll give you already the ideas. First of all, we have the rabbinical commentary on Esther. And there's a really interesting passage here in which I read this morning. Where is it? In the Talmud, Chulin 139b. The tractate Chulin, right? The Talmud 139b. This is one of the tractates of the Talmud. And they say something very interesting. They make a connection between the name of Esther and the verb, the Hebrew verb, let me get it right, lehastir. Okay, write this down. So lehastir and Esther, right? So connection between the two verbs, okay. Hebrew, and lehastir. Esther is with Samech, or can somebody check for me? Yes, thank you. And then Esther. Still. Okay, you see the connection, right? The linguistic connection between the verb to hide, lehastir, which means to hide, sorry, and Esther, which is just a noun version, right? Now, it's interesting because you have a whole, in the prophetic literature, the books of Isaiah especially, you have this notion of God hiding his face. And the verb that is used to talk about God hiding his face is lehastir, hester panim, right? He's hiding his face. So the rabbis kind of play on this connection and they say, right, in this book, God is hiding his face, right? But he's hiding his face, yet he is working secretly in the background, right? That's the idea. So I'll read you I'll just read it to you, the rabbinic commentary, and you can check yourselves later. From where in the Torah, this is the rabbi speaking, from where in the Torah can one find an allusion to the events involving Esther? And you reply to them that the verse states, and he's quoting here this rabbi, Deuteronomy 31. My anger was kindled against them on that day, God is speaking. I will forsake them. I will hide my face from them. And the word hide is from the verb lehastir, which is connected to the word Esther. They will be devoured and so forth and so forth. And I will hide my face again on that day from all the evil which they have wrought. So they're saying, right, just like God hides his face when there's too much evil, in the book of Esther, God is hiding his face. And there's a play on, and so the name Esther is alluding to that, right? Alluding to this notion here, God is hiding his face. He's not present, but hiding his face doesn't mean he's absent, simply means he is working in the background secretly, right? Yes.
They drew a direct connection between him talking about hiding his face in Deuteronomy to Esther here.
Yes,
Oh.
it's I continue to read the quote. Hold on. Yes, they said, from where in the Torah can we find allusion to Esther? And then they quote the verse in Deuteronomy 31 where it talks about hiding the face, right? So basically the idea here, the rabbis are saying in this kind of convoluted way, they're saying God is here, but he's hiding, right? That's the idea. And hiding means that he is there pulling the strings behind the scenes, right? Okay, so that's one way they're redeeming the text, right? Trying to get it. And Esther, you see, is connected, right? It's the semantically connected to the verb to hide. And we know Esther is hiding also, right? So God is hiding, Esther is hiding, everything is happening in secret. Very different here again to the book of Daniel, where Daniel is much more ostentatious about his Jewishness, right? When the king says, you will worship me, Daniel goes, opens the window wide, continues praying towards the east like he has always done in the face of everybody, right? He's not hiding. Esther is hiding. It's a very different context, right? Both are resisting in their own way, right? Okay, so we have this. So here's another thing, though, to be said about the presence of God in the book, the veiled presence of God in the book. You have the notion of fasting, which you have two things that occur, which remind us of the book of Leviticus, the priestly book of the Hebrews, right? You have the book of Leviticus, which is has to do with all of the priestly rituals, the sacrifices, and so forth. And have to do with bringing God into the world, right? The whole sacrificial system is how do we draw God into the world? And we have two allusions to the book of Leviticus. We have the fasting that she goes through, but we also have a very interesting moment when she approaches the king, and we're going to study that. But I'm just going to throw it out there. We have the verb when she approaches the king. Sorry, we're just killing it with the Hebrew today. Which we studied before. What's that word connected? What's the noun that goes with this verb? In the Levitical context, which we talked about. And what does kirev mean? To approach, right? Proximity.
Sacrifice.
There you go, korban. Right? We studied that last time. Just check your notes. Right? So we have that same word that we studied last time with regards to the Song of Songs. Remember, we talked about sacrifice. We talked about the Holy of Holies in the Song of Songs. Why is the Holy of Holies? Because the love is sacrificial. Why sacrificial matters? Because in the Levitical context, when you sacrifice, boom, you bring God's presence, and they're related semantically, right? Proximity and sacrifice, or intimacy and sacrifice, are related. So it's interesting that when she goes to the king, instead of using the normal word, she went, right? Or she presented herself. It says she drew near with that verb, which is straight out of the Levitical context, which implies sacrifice, right? So we'll talk about that. So you have, little hints here and there of the divine presence, but in general, God is behind the scenes. The verticality is not visible, right? This connection, direct, it's more, everything's taking place horizontally, right? Any questions on that one or comments before we continue? Yeah.
There's a point where Mordecai tells her to go to the king, and he tells her that if you don't do this, God will choose somebody else.
Is it God though, or is it the salvation will come from somewhere else?
That's not the translation.
Hopefully there's no God, because it'll just go against everything. I just...
That's God, actually.
Okay, good. I think it says salvation will come from elsewhere or something like that.
Yeah. But the implication.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Salvation
Yeah.
and you'll be destroyed along with everybody else.
Yeah. And the word salvation, anybody have the Hebrew there for that one? Because that would be interesting.
Sure.
Is that what the word is in there though?
I don't
Because that's what I want to know. Anybody, you have the Hebrew, Davidovich? Yeah. Can you give him the reference so he can find it? I didn't bring my text today. We'll wait till you find it. Okay, yes, that could be another reference, absolutely. Good. All right. Let's see. Back to law versus wisdom. So how close are you to finding it? Somebody find me the reference. Everybody look in your text for the reference when he says salvation will come from somewhere else. So Mordechai is trying to convince.
It's in, 4:13.
4:13?
You remain silent, relief and rescue to the Jews from elsewhere.
Okay, good.
So it doesn't mention God, actually. but
No, no.
It alludes to the.
Yeah,
fact that
yeah.
God would choose God would choose another to.
Yeah, that works.
Hatzala,
Hatzara?
Hatzala.
Hatzalah.
Rescue.
Ah, it's not even salvation. Yeah, it's a very secular word. Right, Hatzalah. Okay, so still not, that doesn't bring it into, yeah, that doesn't bring us into the, right, deliverance like normal secular term. Okay, so we don't have, if we had Yeshua or whatever, was a really nice Hebrew word for salvation, that would have been nice, but we don't. So
Yeah, I mean, so like the rabbis interpret that as to be God, but
Yeah,
actually
yeah, yeah.
It's, the terminology is very vague.
it's very secular, yeah. Okay, good. So let's,
This is the Reva,
the what?
Reva,
Reva, where, before?
the Reva for Hatzala.
Oh,
Deep
okay.
in the-
And Reva, is that like, is that a word that you see in the religious context, or is it also just secular?
Could be.
Reva.
Could be. Okay, so it's hinting, right?
It's a very common,
Yeah.
that's why it's very vague, because it's a common word.
Got it. Yes, definitely. Could be either way, right?
So.
Yeah,
It's in the-
It's
it's
never,
in
it's
the
never a
Kadesh.
biblical way.
yeah, okay,
It's
got
like
it.
everyday life.
Yeah, excellent.
It's in the
So, okay.
Kadesh. Reva, Hatzala.
Yeah, but the Kaddish came later.
Yeah,
Good, good, good. Okay, well, anyways, we have little subtle hits, right, of the book being perhaps with, something going on in the background. Okay, any other comments on this so far before we go to law and wisdom? We have time, so you can say whatever you want to say. Okay, all right, law versus wisdom. So here's where Rivera is going to be interesting to us because he has the Hellenistic version. So definitely this book's very different from the book of Daniel, right? In the book of Daniel, you have a strong desire to still keep the commandments of the land of Israel within Babylon, right? When Daniel arrives in Babylon, immediately he's confronted with, okay, what am I going to eat, right? And to bypass the problem, of course, he can't ask, please make everything kosher and kill it in this way and that way. He just says, let me be a vegetarian. That will resolve the issue. So he asks for a purely vegetarian diet. Why? Not because he's, a new agey, enlightened vegan, right? He's actually thinking, I need to be able to keep kosher. I can't ask them this, so I'm just going to, right? So he's trying to keep the commandments that he was keeping in the land of Israel. He's really resisting assimilation, right? And then, of course, he's praying 5 or 3 times a day, I believe. He's making sure he's not bowing down to any idols. In fact, it's interesting. Have anybody ever wondered about this? When the king in the book of Daniel makes a big statue of himself and everybody's there, the 3 friends of Daniel are there. Anybody wonder where Daniel was? Anybody? Why? It's intriguing, right? Anybody wonder about that? Why is it that Daniel wasn't there? And Daniel, remember, was quite close to the king. So I've read some commentators that say, the king actually, either 2 things, either Daniel stayed home, it's like the hell with this stupid, this stupid idea. And the king kind of let it go because they were friends, or the king intentionally sent Daniel to some distant province so Daniel wouldn't have to be, dealing with this tension. But definitely, it's very strange that Daniel is not present, but his friends are. And what do the friends do when they are asked to bow before the statue of the king? Do you remember? No, you don't know? Yeah, such an why? We need to bring in the book of Daniel into this class.
Not a book that's read on any holiday.
That's true.
Do I have a phone up front? Can I call Charles?
I know, where's Charles when we need him? Yes. Okay, well, take a look at the book of Daniel because it's a very good book to read in parallel with the book of Esther. So in this book, the 3 friends of Daniel refuse to bow down in front of the idol, and they're tossed into a fiery furnace, which they've survived, right? And come out unscathed, right? Beautiful story, right? Beautiful story of triumph also, right? But very visible, they're still very Hebrew, right? Here we have, she's doing no effort to integrate on any of these levels, right? She is captured by the king's soldiers. She's brought into the harem, no resistance, right? In the harem, she eats whatever is put in front of her. In the end, she ends up sleeping with a pagan king and then becomes the queen of this is crazy. The rabbis were so uncomfortable. They came up with the version you have. So they actually rewrote the book of Esther with emphasis on, how Esther was keeping kosher. I'm not even kidding. Like in that story, so his version is the ones that the Catholic maintain in their Bibles, but it's a version that was written by the rabbis during the Greek era, written in Greek. And they say how Esther, before she had to sleep with the king, she prayed the whole night, crying to God, forgive me, I have to go with it. None of that here. Esther just goes with the flow, right? And then they also have this notion that Esther, when she's fasting, she prays this long prayer to God, right? It's a beautiful, like to the degree that Daniel was praying, right? Daniel also prayed long prayers to God, right? For salvation. She's doing, so the book really shows, in fact, the discomfort of the rabbis with the way that Esther kind of really assimilates. She's really blending in, right? The only indication that Esther is still Jewish is she hides her Jewish name, right? So there's still an element of resistance, but it's very, very subtle. It's a different type of resistance than the one we see in Daniel. Interesting, right?
The only thing that's mentioned, eating a thing on her thought is that she has these wine parties.
Where is that mentioned?
And when she invites the king and
She hosts them
Oh.
for people instead of for herself. Like, she goes.
Yeah, she's feasting with the king, and yes, it's a wine feast, yes, for good reason.
It doesn't say whether she eats another meat. or whatever,
Yeah.
But it's assimilated community.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. She's the one feeding. That's also interesting. That she's the one feeding the king and Haman. That should be explored. Good. So okay. So we see, first of all, right, she's not fighting assimilation. She's blending in, actually, and she's really living according to the ethics of survival. This is the way of a woman who's trying to survive. So she blends in. And least resistance, right? She's trying to be as invisible as possible. And up until that point, as long as she's in the kind of wallflower, right? The world is moving faster and faster into darkness and chaos, right? Because she's so passive, right? It's only when she begins to put herself together, right, and takes a step and becomes proactive, right, moves from passive to active, that the world begins to come back into place, right? It's as though the cosmic order depends on her ability to rise up to the occasion. If she doesn't rise up to the occasion, the whole world dissolves, right? It's really in her hands. Yes.
I mean, that the counter to that might be in the quote that we kind of went over a little bit, where it says, if where Mordecai warns her, if you don't help us, the world will still be okay. Just you won't be.
I like that. Yes, you're right. That's interesting. So he's saying, don't think that. Okay, I like that. Yeah, so in a way it depends on her, and in a way it doesn't, right? Nicely put, yes. And you can think both of these ideas together. It will make you smarter. Is to think both. It depends all on her. What's that quote? Act as if it depends all on, wait, how is it? Act as if everything depends on you, but nobody knows this quote. Google it. Begin, act as if, you know this? Act as if everything depends on you, but it's a great quote. Do you see it? It's kind of Esther. Let me see. I can come up with it faster. Act as if
Pray as though everything depended on God.
Yeah.
act as though everything depended on you.
That's it. Pray as if everything depends on God, and act as if everything depends on you. This is kind of the nice balance we can see here, right? It all depends on God, and at the same time, it all depends on Esther. Again, this notion of a covenant, right? God doesn't act until we act. This is very Hebraic. This is one of the most Hebraic moments in the book of Esther, that God doesn't act until she acts, right? Good. So, yes. By the way, it's interesting that she's also classified as one of the 7 prophetesses of the Hebrew Bible, right? Still, the Talmud, remember, there's 7 prophetess. How do you say prophetesses? Right? Sarah, Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, and Esther. Why is she classified as a prophet? What makes her a prophet? Interesting. Remember, Abigail is also a prophet. What did she do that made her a prophet? And you'll understand how Esther is a prophet. And we studied Abigail. What did she do?
And she kind of turned away the wrath of David, made him realize that what he was doing was wrong.
She knew how to speak to him in a way that, right, opened his heart, right? She knew how to yeah, she knew how to speak to him in a way that he was that she would find favor with him. Esther has the same gift, right? And we're going to study how she does it also. She has a way of speaking that enables her to find favor. It's so sad, right? We have the wisdom, but we don't have the way of speaking, right? You have to know how to speak. Of course, you know what is the right thing to do, but you also have to know how to say it to be received by the other person. Esther masters that, right? Just like Abigail. And in that sense, she's also a prophet, right? According to the rabbis. So she's wise, in other words. She has the same wisdom that Abigail has. And so that situates her also as one of the figures of Lady Wisdom, right? She's able also to speak, and she's able to influence, and she's able to, you know, inaugurate the king's true authority. So in a way, we can see definitely Esther moving as an embodiment of Lady Wisdom that we've met so far, right? Okay, any questions on this or comments before we move on to the next one? Okay. Separation versus integration. And I've said almost everything about that before. Right, this is, how did I end up talking about all that before? Yes, this is the notion of how integrated and assimilated she is and how horrified the rabbis are about that, how she's different from Daniel because Daniel, you know, explicitly resists assimilation. Esther doesn't, she resists implicitly, right? They both resist. I'm not going to say Esther didn't resist. They both resist, but Daniel is explicit. Esther is secretive, right, about it. Yeah. And there's an interesting quote again in the Talmud. So her Hebrew name is Hadassah. Write it down. She's translated Myrtle. The myrtle plant. Thank you. We have a botanist here with me. You are also doing that in the Song of Songs, right? Looking at the plants. That's good. Good, important detail. It's interesting quote. In the midst of the thorns, the myrtle remains the myrtle. It's a quote from the Talmud, right? Let me say it again. In the midst of the thorns, the myrtle remains the myrtle. In other words, wherever the myrtle is, it remains itself, right? In the rabbinic quotes, they're alluding to myrtle as the people of Israel. Wherever they are, they stay themselves, right? Or the righteous person, whatever they are, wherever they are put, whatever context they are, even if they're surrounded by thorns, they remain, right? The myrtle, you plant it anywhere, it stays the same. Doesn't become bothered by the thorns or whatever. I'm translating from the French, so it's like in the midst of the thorns, the myrtle remains the myrtle. Tractate Megillah.
This is still under separation versus integration.
Yeah. Right, so in the Tractate Megillah of the Talmud, you have this quote, in the middle of the thorns, the myrtle remains the myrtle. You plant the myrtle anywhere, it's going to prosper. It's going to be very green. It's a tiny leaves, right? Green leaves. So the idea that even in the desert, that thing gonna prosper, right? Okay. By the way, speaking of integration and separation, Esther is, we tend to think of her as kind of this, you know, dumb blonde initially, but she's actually of royal line, right? She's, do you know who she's descendant from? In the text, it gives us some indication. So she's the niece of Mordechai, and Mordechai's genealogy is given. What's the ancestor of Mordechai? So of course, Mordechai also is associated with royalty.
Really, it's first.
Yeah, first cousin, sorry. Detail. That's better than niece, yes, less incestuous.
Levi, son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, who was from the tribe of Benjamin, was carried into exile along with the king.
Now, I'm just saying this from the top of my head, but I think Kish was the father of Saul.
Yeah.
Yes?
That's the one
Okay.
I mentioned.
Okay. So he's a descendant, or he's from the family of King Saul, the first king of Israel. So she's a direct descendant from there, right? And interestingly, it turns out that Haman is a descendant of Amalek, right? So you have this warfare playing out again, right? Final war, final battle. So she's definitely royalty. She's not just this, kind of a wallflower. She's actually a very strong personality, right? This is what's interesting about Esther. Initially, she seems very frail and delicate, but when you read a little bit and you realize she's royalty from the royal line of King Saul, and you realize she's hiding her name, meaning she's hiding her power and her identity, you see that there's more than meets the eye in her from the start, and then eventually it blossoms, right? Okay, good. Let's go to the last one. That way we can have a nice afternoon outside early. I see you all look desperate to go out. You look wilted today. I want to put you out in the sunshine, like little pots of flowers, little myrtles. Let me free you soon. Okay. Okay, last one, doing versus receiving. Okay, so definitely, so it's interesting with Esther because we've been talking about receptivity, rest, surrender throughout the class. Now we have the opposite, right? She rises in power and action and proactiveness, right? So she's very masculine in the role where the main role that she's given is a masculine role, right? So it's interesting. And she rises from there from a very passive state. When it says she was taken, this is pure passivity. She has no agency, no direction, no proactiveness. She's just taken, going with the flow. And this is not her best role, right? Only when she begins to rise and two things, act and speak. By the way, she never speaks. There's no speech in her until she begins to finally speak to the king, right? There's something really that has to grow in her, develop in her, evolve, mature in her. And she moves then into powerful words and powerful actions. So here we have a book that's much more masculine, right? Definitely. And so in a sense, both women and men can learn from this, right? This is really a book about, I think, confronting chaos and recovering order. And so what are the steps? And we're going to see a much more active stance than we're used to, right? In the Mother's House book, group of books. Okay, any questions on this? Yes?
I mean, I would also essentially say that it could also go in the direction of receiving, because even though she does, become more active, and like the Jewish people as a whole in that story have to become more active in order to save themselves, there is an emphasis on the fact that a lot of it is less their own actions and just faith. Like it could have gone completely in the other direction. When she approaches Hashverosh and like the people fast, like she has no control over that situation at all.
That's true. That's
He
true.
can it was just at his mercy that like he decided to not punish her for approaching him without being invited.
Good. Thank you
Like
for
the
that.
people themselves fasted like to hope that luck and the God would
Yes.
sway in their way.
Yes,
And then
nice.
even after that, they couldn't take the direct action of like the king couldn't say, I can't directly like refute my order. That would make me look horrible. So you guys are still going to have to like deal with the order as it stands, so that there's some receptivity in that as well.
I like that, especially since her main action is an action of surrender, right? If I die, I die.
Yeah.
It's the sacrificial action of coming close to the king. So I like that. Okay, thank you. That redeems me. You redeem the thesis of the book. Rivera and then Bedel.
What about his reward from the king comes directly from the pain? He doesn't have to garner that.
Oh, that's true. It kind of came to him, right? And also the king has a bad night and he remembers, right, that Mordechai helped him and then Haman proposes. So things are happening behind the scenes, right? I guess they're just stepping in, but they're not doing, right? I like that. They're just stepping into the situation, making, speaking, and then whatever happens is really out of their hands, right? That's good. Thank you. Bedel?
For Esther, I think, also knowing the difference between knowing what your role or job is here, where she's the role is to be queen, and knowing what her purpose is, or finding her purpose.
Yeah.
And her purpose is much greater than just being his queen of the moment.
Exactly, right? She really, we see the evolution of a woman here, really. But if you're reading this as a woman, it's very interesting because all women start out like Esther, right? Kind of passive, not wanting to, rock the boat or kind of, and then little by little we have to grow into our power, right? And this is kind of, I like reading Esther in that, under that light, right? That lens of female individuation, right? So very interesting. Okay, so next time we will do Vashti's banquet. I want you to focus on that. So this is the first few chapters, first chapter, I think, and then we'll look at. So just read up until she. Let's see. Read up until the first banquet. Okay, so she up until the moment she comes into the king's presence, and invites him, and then that's the first part, and then the next part will be what happens at this banquet, right? That's what we'll do the day after. So just read for now up until the invitation to the banquet, and then the rest for next time. All right, good. So go outside, get some sun, so you don't wilt completely. And I'll see you Tuesday, right? Next Tuesday. Good. Thursday. Where are we? What are we? Tuesday? Thursday. I don't know where we are. I don't know what's going on. Okay.
Oh.